Welcome to r/MaliciousCompliance, where we share stories of people conforming to the letter, but not the spirit of a request. And today we have 3 great stories, so subscribe, hit the like button, and let's begin. The first story. Building coordinator didn't want to listen to my warning that he was setting things up in an unsafe environment. I waited until he was done making the mistake. The second story. Home Office refuses a 93-year-old's application to join her children in the UK. Because she's in good health, so we get her a work visa instead. The third story. I got suspended from the store, so I went to another store and picked up all my pre-orders. Today's first story is Building Coordinators Are Idiots. This is a story that happened a couple of years ago, so I'm going to do my best to remember as much of the details as I can. So I was working in a warehouse a couple of years ago as a dock clerk. My job duties included processing and labeling containers of packages to be shipped globally. I was also one of a handful of forklift drivers in the building. I would have to drive a sit-down forklift from my side of the building to the far side of the building on a regular basis to pick up and move pallets of cardboard Gaylord shipping containers and bring them to the other side of the building. Sometimes I would have to do that at least 2 to 3 times during my shift. The various paths that they would set up for me to drive to do that part of my job could be pretty tricky at times, because I would have to raise the pallets into the air very highly at times to make it around certain objects. That was not always the easiest task, but it was obtainable to do that for the most part. The building coordinator and I did not always see eye to eye on things, and we would have regular disagreements on things the whole time I worked as a dock clerk at this job. He would attempt to set things up, and I would look at him and argue about the way that certain things would not work out with the way he had them set up. His rebuttal would always be that's how the higher-ups wanted it, and I would prove him wrong on it just about every time. One day I come into work, and the building coordinator was already there mapping out this one area to set up some new lanes to store the shipping containers in. The problem with the new lanes he was trying to put in place was that now I would have to drive all the way around a conveyor, having to drive dangerously close to the other coworkers, to then be able to drive to the other side of the building. He didn't want to listen to me when I told him that it would make my job, and anyone else working in that area, now, a very dangerous place to work in. The conveyor I would have to drive around would regularly have at least 3 to 4 girls working in that area. Also, the area I would now have to drive through is a high-volume area for foot traffic. It was near the break area and closest to security, and the closest restroom for a lot of people. So I walked away and gave him one last chance to listen to me. Now for the malicious compliance. Since the building coordinator did not want to listen to my warning about the way that he was setting up things in an unsafe environment, I waited for him to finish setting up the area, and then let him leave for the day. Afterwards, I tried to drive a forklift through the now designated area that he wanted me and any other forklift operator to drive through. Said area had maybe a 4-foot gap that I would now have to maneuver a forklift through, with the end of the conveyor and trash cans on one side and rolling bins sitting on the other side. The forklift I was using was roughly barely about that same width and size. I made it about halfway through trying to go through that gap with a couple of coworkers and a security guard standing there to watch me try to drive through this gap. I had to come at this gap already at an angle, because of other containers and items in the area I was coming from. I was headed to grab a pallet of shipping containers to bring back to my side of the building. This was all done in clear view of the security cameras also. Since I had to approach it at an angle, I ended up running into some of the rolling carts and pushing them into a fence on the other side of them. As soon as I hit the cart, I put my forklift in park, went to get my supervisor, explained what had happened and what had led up to it, and told him I would back my forklift out of the area, and then I wouldn't touch the forklifts again until the issue was fixed. The next day, the building coordinator came in specifically on my shift to make sure he could set me up a lane that I could drive through, eliminating the lanes that he had set up the previous day. He made sure that he checked with me on what I needed for it. I made sure that the lane he set up was at least 2 storage lanes wide, clearly marked to not store anything in that area, and was able to drive through it without having to raise the pallets of shipping containers in the air. The next story is Malicious Compliance, Immigration Law Edition. I'm an immigration lawyer in the UK, and if you don't know anything about our immigration system, it's just a mess. The rules are tough, often cruel, very complex, and there's very little flexibility. It doesn't matter how sympathetic someone's circumstances are. If you don't meet all the rules, you're not coming in, even if it's to join your family. Even if you're an elderly person who just wants to spend their final years with their British children. Especially if you're an elderly person who just wants to spend their final years with their British children. Enter Doris, not a real name. Doris is a 93-year-old Australian citizen who lives alone in a nursing home. All her children are in the UK. Doris had a modest wish to move in with her daughters in the UK and spend her twilight years with her family. She was in pretty good health, but her continuing isolation led to anxiety and depression, especially after she was the victim of a robbery. So Doris did what she thought was the right way of going about it. She applied to move to the UK as an adult dependent relative. What she did not know was that this route had almost impossible requirements, so tough that only about 5% of these applications are actually granted outright, and a further 5% succeed on appeal. So the odds are pretty terrible, and you don't get the £3,250 application fee that you paid back if it's refused. Alongside financial and relationship requirements, she had to show that she required continuous care with everyday tasks, like dressing and cooking for herself, and that this care is not available in Australia. She could meet neither of these rules and her application was refused. The refusal letter made a point of emphasizing her excellent health, important for later, as evidenced by the letter she included from her doctor, completely ignoring the parts about her anxiety and depression. This is when she approached my firm for help. Now, appealing this decision would have been a waste of time. She clearly didn't need constant care with everyday tasks, and any care that she might have needed could be found in Australia. But after speaking with Doris, we realized something. Not only was she a Commonwealth citizen, as a citizen of Australia, but both of her grandparents were born in the UK. So we hatched a plan. The plan. What Doris didn't know was there was another visa she might be eligible for, UK ancestry. To meet the requirements, she had to be a Commonwealth citizen and have at least one grandparent born in the UK. Done and done. However, this was technically a work visa, so she had to intend to work in the UK, and she was very much retired. The thing about the UK ancestry route is that the Commonwealth citizenship and UK-born grandparent requirements mean that overwhelmingly, the people who qualify for this route are white. And because our immigration system is somewhat racist, that means that many aspects of this visa are very generous, or even lax compared to other routes. You get a 5-year visa straight away, instead of having a 2.5-year one that has to be renewed, at extortionate prices before you can qualify for permanent residence. Even the application fee is lower than other categories. Crucially, when it comes to the work aspect, you don't need to be sponsored by an employer. You don't need to work a certain number of hours. The work can be on and off, and even volunteering counts as work. This will be important later. The malicious compliance. You say Doris is in such great health that she doesn't qualify for an adult dependent relative visa? Okay, cool. She'll apply for a work visa then. Since the work could be volunteering, she reached out to a community center in the UK and offered to volunteer at a lunch service they provided for the elderly. The center was thrilled to have a new volunteer and wrote her a letter confirming this. After preparing all the other documents, including some going as far back as the 19th century, like her grandparents' birth certificates, we were almost ready to go. All that remained was our covering letter. After outlining how she met all the requirements, I couldn't resist quoting from her previous refusal letter about her excellent health, and explaining that given that, Doris would now be working in the UK. I also provided details of the few hours a week she would be volunteering at the community center, and reminded them that their own guidance says they cannot discriminate by age. Her visa was granted and she has now joined her family in the UK, as she wanted all along, and all she has to do to apply for permanent residence in 5 years' time is volunteer for a few hours a week. It's worth pointing out that the reason the adult dependent relative rules are so stringent is because in 2012, the Home Office decided that it's costing the country too much to allow elderly parents to settle here, as they were considered a drain on the NHS, our universal healthcare system that's free at the point of use. So the rules were changed to make it almost impossible for them to move to the UK. This is despite the fact that prior to the rule change, only about 2,000 people used this route to move to the UK. But there was nothing they could do to stop this 93-year-old in excellent health from joining her family here on this work visa. Edit. Interesting. Here the Home Office doesn't care one bit if an MP is involved in a case. They barely bat an eyelid if one complains on an immigrant's behalf. And the involvement of a British national does almost nothing to ensure the application is granted, beyond meeting one of the requirements, where relevant. Paradoxically, the applications that have the highest grant rates are the ones not involving British citizens, like work and student visas. This is in part because the rules tend to be simpler for those routes, because those applicants are seen as more valuable to the UK than the ones seeking to join family here. The one thing the Home Office does care about is the press. If a sympathetic story of an unfair refusal is in the media, they'll usually make the bad publicity go away, often in a matter of days, by granting whatever visa is required. Sadly, it's very possible that she won't be alive in 5 years' time, but it's basically an ingrained instinct in every half-decent immigration lawyer to think about the future. Because this route is unsponsored, she can actually do nothing for the 5 years, and this wouldn't be grounds for her visa to be revoked, or for her to be removed from the UK. It's more that at her age, it might raise doubts about her intention to work if she was obviously retired, and showed no evidence of an intention to work when applying for the visa, which is why we put in evidence of the volunteering. If she was of working age, we probably wouldn't have bothered to include evidence of intention to work, because it would just be assumed. But if she came to the end of the 5 years and she hadn't volunteered at all, she would likely be refused permanent residence, also known as indefinite leave to remain or ILR here. So the modest volunteering is just planning ahead just in case. The last story is, not allowed in the store? Fine, I'll comply. This happened a few years ago. I used to work at a popular game store where pre-orders are very encouraged. I was the only manager on duty when a customer came in to get their pre-order of the game. The game was Jump Force. There's 3 editions for the game: regular, special edition, and collector's edition. If you pre-ordered the special edition, you can pick up the game early on Tuesday. It was now Wednesday and the regular version released on Friday, or Thursday night for how my store did it. I already knew people were coming in to pick up the game. When I clocked in, my store leader told me he called several people to let them know they can pick up their game, and he left for the day. I was running the store with another employee when one came in to pick up their collector's edition of the game. I told him only the special edition, not the collector's, is available for pickup. He was upset and confused because the special edition is like $80, while the collector's edition is $250. To top it off, he pulled out his phone and played a voicemail of the store leader saying to come pick up the collector's edition. Well, hard to argue with that, especially since the store leader got upset last time I didn't give out a pre-order item. Long story short with that, I got in trouble. Had to call the guy to bring it back, and he did bring it back the next day. Again, for the record, the game was already released at that point, so there wasn't any big issue with the game being out before release. It was just the addition of the game. A few months go by when our district manager comes in and interrogates me about that day, and wanted me to sign a statement saying I cost the company money. I refused to sign it because it wasn't really my fault. I just did what the store leader said and the customer brought it back the next day, and was specifically asking for employees to not get in trouble. I got suspended and was not allowed in the store till the suspension was over. Cue malicious compliance. As I said earlier, the company's very big on pre-orders. They push it extremely hard on the employees to have customers pre-order games collectibles. Their entire metrics and programs meant just to measure pre-orders. I like to collect Yu-Gi-Oh cards. There was a very popular set, and I pre-ordered 15 of them because I get a discount and I like cards. Well, it turns out I was not allowed back in the store to pick up my pre-orders while I was suspended. Fine, I went to another store to pick them up, and had them call my store to cancel all the pre-orders, and just pick up all the ones that store had. This completely messed with the store numbers. Didn't care. Got fired after my suspension instead of coming back on. Whatever. The store closed down less than a year later. I was working a high stress level job with pretty good pay, while my wife got her degree. Once she got a really high paying job, she told me to quit to get a nice chill job. I worked there because I genuinely did like it. Be sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and have a good day.